I'm sitting in front of what I would say is probably one of the most underrated crops in a home garden, permaculture, environment, food forest, and that is amaranth. Why I say that? It's not often a crop that's spoken about. However, today I'm going to talk to you about amaranth in detail so that you have all the information you need about this superfood crop that is an absolute beauty and showstopper in the garden. So before we get into the fun things like growing amaranth and how to eat it, let's take a step back and let's look at what is amaranth. Amaranth is considered an ancient grain, and it is in the same category of ancient grain as quinoa. Funny enough, it's also in the same family. So you can actually think of it that quinoa and amaranth are cousins from the same family that offer very much similar traits in how they grow, how they taste, how they produce the seeds. There are some differences, there are a lot of similarities, but what it is it is a seed. It is not technically a grain. And I'll get into some more of that detail now. It is also considered a pseudo cereal, meaning it is neither a cereal nor a grain. And quinoa is in the same family. Pseudo cereals are the three main ones, which is amaranth, buckwheat, and quinoa. Quinoa and amaranth being in the same family obviously share the same characteristics, buckwheat not. But those are the three main pseudo cereals that can be used as a cereal, but it can also be used in sweet, savory dishes and have a lot of similar characteristics. It is also an annual, meaning every year, spring, early summer, it'll come up and it will just explode with growth and absolute beauty. Depending on the variety, you get tall, vertical flower growing amaranths like the giant amaranth. You get pink, purple, violet, orange, yellow, white, all these different colors. You have these drooping ones. You have semi-upright, upright. There are so many different types of amaranth that you can grow. But in essence, they appear, they go to seed, and then they disappear. If you're in a permaculture food forest or an environment like I am, all you'd be doing is as soon as they've gone to seed like they have now, you give it a shake and the seeds are going to disperse around the area. And what that means is then you got your next flush that's going to come up naturally without you having to do anything. So from that point of view, you can get continuous harvests from this without planning, without going to buy annuals and having to get in an annual cycle of having to do so many different varieties, the change of all the seasons. Amaranth is one of those that'll just keep going, so it's the perfect plant for a permaculture environment, and also absolute showstopper in the home garden. So now let's talk a little bit more about the actual seed of amaranth. So how is amaranth edible? Let's talk a little bit about what makes it such a great plant. First of all, the seeds that are produced in these beautiful flowers are obviously edible. Like I mentioned, they're in the same category as quinoa. Tiny little seeds that you can use in so many different ways. Then there are the leaves, which in South Africa is quite often called marog. They can be used exactly the same as spinach. We quite often have amaranth, creamed amaranth leaf, very much like creamed spinach. Very, very high in nutritional value compared to spinach as the whole amaranth plant is. Then the stems are also edible. So you can cut the stems up into little sections, steam them, cook them, and have them as a nice little crunchy addition to any meal, just to try and use as much of the plant as possible. You can use the roots. I personally haven't used it because I cut them and I actually leave the roots in the ground as part of the process of creating a natural, healthy underground environment with roots decaying and creating organic material underground. But this brings me back to what I was talking about earlier about amaranth being a seed and not technically a grain. For something to be considered a grain, it needs to have, in essence, 3 layers: the bran, the germ, and the endosperm. Those 3 things make up what makes grains so amazing. Nutritional carbohydrates that are full of fiber. In essence, the bran is where all the fiber comes from. The germ, the little nutrient sac, is where all the nutrients are sitting within the little grain kernel. And then the endosperm is where all the carbohydrates are stored. Now, if we look at amaranth seed, it is a single seed that from that the plant is producing new plants. It does not have all of those layers which would make it technically a grain. However, that being said, quinoa and amaranth are categorized as small grains, probably just easier that way. But if you want to get down to some technicalities, it is a seed-based crop, not a grain-based crop. What that means is it's gluten-free. So when you are eating amaranth seeds in the different ways that you can, which I'll still get to, you can be guaranteed that you are having a gluten-free meal that is incredibly high in nutritional value. How high? Very high is the answer. In fact, it has more protein than quinoa. It has twice the amount of iron. It has zinc. It has magnesium. What we are talking about is a cup of amaranth seeds containing about 9 grams of protein and about 5 milligrams of iron. That's a pretty damn good meal. And then if you start adding additional things into that meal, it becomes quite substantial in its nutritional value that it offers. If you can take amaranth seeds, create a porridge out of it, on the savory side, use the leaves to mix into it, and then bring in some other veggies, that is a really, really punchy nutritional meal. So now that we've spoken a bit about what amaranth is, let's talk about how to grow it and then how to eat it. Amaranth is an annual, like I said. So plant the seeds, they come up, they grow throughout spring and summer, produce these beautiful flowers. Within the flowers then go to seed. The seed can then be harvested, and then you would have another crop the following spring and summer. That's how annuals work. However, you can turn this into a perennial, like I said, by just giving the flowers a little shake, and then it'll just keep coming up year after year after year. It'll spread throughout the garden, and if you don't pick them like you would pick weeds, you would have an endless perennial supply of amaranth in the garden. They are super easy to grow. They require no maintenance, no pruning, no care and finesse. They're drought hardy. So in areas specifically like where I am in Cape Town in South Africa, we have very hot, dry summers. These plants have not had a lot of water and they're absolutely thriving. There's one in the corner I'll show you that has got pretty much no water. It's the first one to start fading off. Its leaves are busy changing color and it's busy dying off. But the rest of them, they're absolutely happy with the amount of water that's been given in the food forest here. Then there are upright, bushy growing plants. This is a small little plant that has, I would say, about 6 stems. So when you plant them, you take the seeds, sprinkle them on top of the soil, put a very, very, very thin layer of soil or sand, because they are surface germinators, meaning if you dig them a centimeter under the soil, they're not going to germinate. They need sun and air to be able to germinate. So it can be a little bit tricky getting them to germinate and grow. But once they grow, boy, do they grow. They just keep going and going and going. And you want to sprinkle them in little clumps so that when they grow and they germinate in a little clump like this. You don't want individual amaranth plants throughout the garden. You want clumps, because then you have what I have in front of me, a beautiful showpiece and a whole bunch of food in one place. They've also got different growth habits. This one is called dreadlocks. So it's not as tall, it's about 1.5 meters and it's bushy. Some of the other ones are more upright, more vertically growing, so they can grow 1.8 to 2 meters, and their flower heads are actually vertical as well. They're not drooping over. So it all depends on the variety. Like I said, different colors, different types, different heights, different, bushiness, upright. There's so many variables when it comes to the amaranth you want to grow. So look at your environment, look at the space you have, and then grow accordingly. Next year I am going to be growing some giant amaranth, which is your taller, more vertical, and I'm actually going to have them in layers. So on this side I'm going to have giant, and in the front the drooping. So you can see you making those various layers which make up a permaculture food forest environment, and then interplant them with a whole bunch of things as well. So now let's talk about the harvesting of amaranth. How do you know when amaranth is ready to be picked? The number one telltale sign is if you put your hand underneath and you shake it a little bit, you should be able to see the seeds coming off. I'm just going to throw those in the garden, and then I've got another flash growing. So that is when you know that they are ready to go. Then what you can do is just cut the plant off like that. I then just pull these leaves off. And then you've got what is basically a little mini dreadlock. Then there are a couple of different ways that you can do this. You can either put a clump of these into a brown bag and hang them, and then after a couple of days, once it's really dried out, you just shake them and all the seeds come off. Or there's another technique which I'll show you later, which is pulling all the tassels off, rubbing them between your hands, and getting all the seed out that way. But in essence, all you need to do is, like I said, over here, snip that off. There's a nice thick cluster of seeds. And if I bring you in really close, you can see inside all of those little seeds. If I move them around, you can see them all jumping about. But these fluffy, thick clusters of flowers are just absolutely filled with hundreds and thousands of little seeds like quinoa. And that's how you harvest it, as simple as that. Now, as part of the harvesting of amaranth seeds, you can get an idea of what it looks like. You can see in my hand here there are hundreds of little seeds that look like chia seeds, and then in here there's quite a lot. I've also only just harvested a very small amount of amaranth. As you can see from the garden flowers, how much is still there. But in essence, what I like to do is put the little dreadlock flowers out on a baking tray or whatever tray you really want to, and just put it in the sun for a couple of days. That's going to allow the bugs to get off. And then what it's going to allow you to do as well is really, really dry out the seed on the plant as much as possible, which is going to be able to maximize the amount of seed you get per flower head. If it's not completely dry, you're not going to be getting as much seed from the flower. And when you're putting in quite a lot of effort to get this, you want to make sure that you can maximize the amount of food you get per flower. Then I just use a colander, a normal one that you use for pasta. I find this works really, really well. Put it on top, and then what I like to do is take it from the top and strip it. And then I'll show you the seeds have already come off. And then you just simply move it around like that. In your hands, if I move this away, you can see all those little seeds. And then you can just keep doing that as much as you want to, really. Here's a nice big one. And then what I also do is you can just put it between your hands like this. You'll hear all the seeds falling out. And this just loosens up, breaks up the flower quite a bit. Yeah, and then the last part of it is to just shake it around. And shake it quite thoroughly so that you can make sure you're getting all of those seeds through the little holes at the bottom. And then once I'm confident that all I'm left with are the flowers, then I simply add those onto the pile, and this goes into the compost. You can see just from the little section I did now, all of the extra little pieces of the flower. You could see there just the little breeze, how it blew away. Then what you need to do is you need to, in essence, get rid of the outer casings on the seeds and then anything else that has fallen through. So hold it and you can very gently blow it. You can shake it around and blow. Okay, and there you've got a lot of it out. And I'll do this as a first step, and then the final step, what I would do is take this, hold another jar underneath it a little bit higher in a very light wind, and pour these ones into the bottom ones, and then as the wind blows through, it's going to blow the rest of the little hulls and flower pieces away, so that you have none left in your bunch of seeds. So all we have left to cover now is how to eat it. So there are a few different ways you can do this. Firstly is by cooking it. What you can do is take a cup of amaranth seeds to 2 cups of water, bring that up to a boil, and it'll make a porridge consistency that you can use as a sweet or a savory porridge. Add in, if you're doing it savory, some of the amaranth leaves, cook that up like spinach, add that in with some other vegetables and some yummy sauces, and you've really got a punchy savory porridge meal. You can then also have the sweet side. Because amaranth has a very nutty flavor and a very smooth texture, you can add in sweeteners like honey or anything natural that you would really prefer, and then things like cinnamon or really anything you want to that would make it a nice sweet dish for you. Then, much like quinoa, you can pop it. So popped quinoa is quite common in a lot of baking dishes. It's great to add, oh yes, you're also looking for some attention. It's great to add into health bars and other things that need a little bit of volume and nutrition. So to enjoy some yummy puffed amaranth, all you need to do is pop it in a popcorn machine if you have one. Otherwise, pop it into a pan or a pot, just dry at the bottom, and it'll start to pop as the heat comes on. But don't let it go too far because you could burn them. I would say once 3/4 of them are popped, take it off. The rest will still gently pop in the background, but don't put them on the heat until all of them have popped. And if that's what you want to do, make sure you take it out the pot immediately, otherwise you're going to end up burning them. And then another way you can have it is how I really like to have it, and it's often how I use my quinoa, is to just put a teaspoon of it inside my smoothies. So if you have a fruit or veggie smoothie in the morning or whenever you do, take a teaspoon, pop it in, and then you just let it sit for a little bit. And then what will happen is the milk or water or whatever liquid you put into your smoothie will get absorbed into the seed, and the seed will swell slightly. Gets a bit of a slimy texture, which is perfectly fine. But then that becomes a really, really healthy superfood addition to a smoothie without the cost of having to buy quinoa seeds. And then when it comes to the leaves, like I mentioned, cut those off. Get quite a bit, because much like spinach leaves, as you cook them, they shrink quite a lot. So put a little bit more than what you think you need into the pot. Then, I mean, there are so many different ways that you can cook up amaranth leaves, like you can spinach leaves. Cook it up, add in cream, or have it just as is, spices. Doesn't really matter. There are so many different ways you can do it. And that's a great way to use the leaves. I think I mentioned cut the little stems into pieces, steam them, boil them, cook them. And that is a great little addition, nice little crunch you can add into your meals with added nutrition, and then you're using the whole plant. So now that you know a hell of a lot more about amaranth than you did a couple of minutes ago, you need to make sure that you include this crop in your next summer, spring planting season planning. Like I said, easy to grow, drought tolerant, produces an abundance of flowers that are just beautiful in the garden, seeds that are edible, leaves that are edible, stems that are edible, and the ability to consume a high nutritional value meal. So if you have not heard much about amaranth, then give it a go, and maybe you can be with me in my opinion that amaranth is one of the most underrated crops to grow in the garden. If you like this video, please give it a thumbs up. Please share it out to your networks and communities so we can spread the love for amaranth. And if you haven't subscribed, please consider doing that. I love sharing my knowledge with you, and every little bit of support is greatly appreciated. And until next time, happy growing.